The lights in the Washington studio dimmed to a low, tense hum. The audience's murmur faded as the camera's red light blinked alive. Every lens, every mic, every heartbeat pointed toward one table, where Denzel Washington sat across from Karoline Leavitt. The silence wasn't empty, it was electric. You could almost hear the air tighten, the kind of silence that comes before the first thunderclap of a storm. Karoline straightened her notes, a perfectly composed smile plastered on her face, a media professional trained to turn chaos into control. Across from her, Denzel didn't move. His stillness was its own weapon. His hands clasped together, his eyes locked on her, waiting. The host gave a nervous grin and spoke the words that would trigger the night's explosion. Tonight, we bring you the debate that America's been waiting for. Denzel Washington versus Karoline Leavitt, truth versus spin. Denzel leaned forward first, his voice calm but cutting through the silence like a blade. You've spent your career controlling the story, Karoline. But here's the thing about stories, when they're built on lies, they always collapse. So tell me, how long can yours stand? The studio fell dead quiet. Karoline blinked once, not fear, but calculation. Denzel, she said softly, it's not lies. It's leadership. You call it spin, I call it stability. A slow grin spread across Denzel's face. Stability, he repeated. Funny. I've seen earthquakes look steadier than your truth. The crowd gasped. The first shot was fired, and everyone knew this wasn't going to be politics as usual. It was personal. The tension in the studio could be sliced with a knife. Cameras zoomed in, framing the battlefield, two faces, two worlds colliding under a storm of lights. Denzel sat upright, his calm now sharpened into command. Leadership, he repeated slowly, like he was tasting the word. If leadership means feeding people polished lies and calling it policy, then you're not leading, you're manipulating. Karoline's expression didn't falter, but her hands betrayed her. The slightest tap of her pen against the desk echoed like a ticking clock. Manipulating, she said, her tone honeyed, rehearsed. You sound like every Hollywood critic who confuses drama with reality. I deal in facts, Denzel. You deal in fantasy. The audience reacted audibly, a mix of gasps and laughter. Denzel chuckled, but his eyes didn't soften. Facts, he said. Which ones? The ones rewritten at 9 a.m. and denied by noon? Or the ones your network buries under 1,000 talking points before people can even breathe? Karoline's mask, the one she'd perfected in countless press briefings, began to slip. Her voice rose, just a touch. You think the truth is simple? Try managing a country drowning in chaos. Denzel leaned closer, elbows on the table, voice low but heavy with conviction. Chaos isn't something you manage, Karoline. It's something you create. When power starts believing its own lies. For the first time, she didn't respond immediately. The silence that followed wasn't hesitation, it was realization. He wasn't debating her for ratings, he was dismantling her narrative piece by piece. One of the producers, off camera, whispered into his headset, "We might need to cut to commercial." But no one dared move. The world was watching, and the truth was finally louder than the spin. The studio lights glared hotter now, catching the sweat on Karoline's temple, not from heat, but from pressure. Every word that escaped Denzel's mouth hit with the precision of a scalpel, slicing through layers of rhetoric that had shielded her for years. The audience leaned forward, transfixed, sensing they were witnessing something raw, the unraveling of control live on national television. Karoline's tone hardened. You think it's easy, sitting where I sit? She snapped. Balancing chaos, politics, media attacks? It's not spin, it's survival. Denzel didn't flinch. His gaze was steady, cutting through her defenses. Survival, he said quietly, almost pitying. That's what truth does, it survives. Lies, though, they rot from the inside. She smirked, trying to recover. And what would you know about truth, Denzel? You live in Hollywood, not Washington. His eyes flashed. Don't confuse geography with integrity. Truth doesn't need a zip code, it just needs courage. A murmur rippled through the crowd, quiet applause, gasps, even a few cheers before the producers signaled silence. Denzel wasn't performing, he was preaching, and every sentence carried the weight of years of frustration bottled up by millions who felt unheard. Karoline leaned back, her smirk fading. "You talk like a revolutionary," she said softly, "but revolutions burn things down. We build." Denzel shook his head, voice calm but devastating. "You don't build, Karoline. You repaint the ruins and call it progress." The entire room froze. Even the camera operators held their breath. For a second, it felt like time had stopped, the power of truth clashing head-on with the machinery of propaganda. Then, almost imperceptibly, Karoline blinked, not in defiance, but in recognition. Somewhere beneath the politics, something in her knew he was right. The crowd didn't need to cheer. The silence said it all. P. Karoline's composure cracked just slightly, the kind of fracture you could barely see, but everyone felt. The mask of the polished political communicator was slipping, and underneath it, the person, the fighter, was clawing to get out. The studio audience could feel it, the same way animals sense a storm before it breaks. The lights hummed, the air grew heavier, and Denzel's voice, low and deliberate, sliced through the silence. "You talk about control," he said, "but all I see is fear dressed up as confidence. You're not leading, Karoline. You're protecting something. What are you so afraid we'll see?" Her eyes flashed, the kind of flash that could silence a press room. "Afraid?" she shot back, voice trembling with both anger and pride. "You think I fear people like you? Actors who come here to lecture about morality while the real world bleeds?" The audience gasped, but Denzel only leaned closer, unshaken. "I don't come here to lecture," he said, his tone sharp but grounded. "I come here because I've seen the cost of your version of the real world, the people you call statistics. I've looked them in the eyes. The parents who can't feed their kids, the veterans ignored by the same government you defend." Karoline blinked, a flicker of humanity, of recognition, but she swallowed it down fast, straightening in her chair. "You think speeches change the world, Denzel? The world runs on hard decisions, not heartstrings." He laughed softly, without humor. "That's the problem. You've turned hearts into collateral damage." The crowd broke, murmurs, gasps, a few spontaneous claps before the moderators tried to quiet them. The line had landed. Hard. Karoline clenched her jaw. "You don't understand the burden of responsibility," she said, voice rising. "You can afford to be idealistic. I can't." Denzel's expression hardened, voice dropping to a near whisper that carried more power than any shout. "No, Karoline. You can't afford not to be." The audience erupted. Some stood, some booed, others cheered. But one thing was certain, the debate had stopped being political. It had become personal. The studio was no longer just a stage, it was a pressure cooker. Every breath, every twitch, every glance carried the weight of something bigger than two people arguing. The moderators had stopped interjecting, even the teleprompters had gone dark. This wasn't debate, it was reckoning. Karoline's voice trembled, though she fought to mask it with confidence. "You think truth is simple, Denzel? You think you can just point fingers and fix a system built before you were born?" Denzel leaned forward, elbows on the table, his tone deep and steady. "Truth isn't simple, Karoline, but lies always are. They fit neatly into slogans and sound bites. Yours sound perfect on paper, until people start starving under them." A ripple of tension rolled through the audience. Someone shouted, "Let him speak." Another yelled, "She's right." The air vibrated with divided fury, the kind that only truth can spark. Karoline's smile was gone. Her hands trembled slightly as she gestured toward him. "You don't know what it's like to make decisions that save lives, and destroy them in the same breath. You have no idea what it means to carry that weight." Denzel didn't blink. "I may not sit in your chair," he said, voice booming now, "but I live in the world your decisions create. And when those decisions bury people's hope, someone has to stand up and call it what it is, corruption wrapped in patriotism." The studio fell silent. No cheers, no boos, just the hum of truth echoing through cameras broadcasting to millions. Karoline's lip quivered, her defiance waning. You think I enjoy this? You think I sleep easy? She whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of her own defenses. You don't know how much blood this job costs. Denzel's gaze softened, but only for a moment. Then stop pretending the blood isn't there. The crowd erupted. The sound was thunder, raw, unfiltered, unstoppable. Phones recorded, headlines were already being written, and somewhere deep inside, Karoline knew this moment would follow her forever. Denzel didn't gloat. He just leaned back, silent, because the truth didn't need an encore. It had already won. The debate had detonated. The audience wasn't just watching anymore, they were witnessing. The tension inside the studio had become physical, like static in the air before lightning. Karoline's mask of poise had cracked completely now. Her breathing was sharp, her voice rising, her words coming faster, almost desperate. You sit there with your speeches and your applause, she snapped, her hands slamming the table. But you don't know what it's like to face down the machine and still smile for the cameras. You think truth alone keeps this country from falling apart? Denzel didn't move, his calm, deliberate presence contrasted like stone against fire. No, he said quietly, truth doesn't hold the country together, people do. And when leaders stop serving those people, when they start protecting power instead of humanity, the truth doesn't whisper anymore. It roars. Karoline froze. That one hit deep, too deep. Her eyes darted toward the moderator, toward the cameras, anywhere but at him. But the red light of the broadcast stayed on, merciless. Millions were watching. There was no escape. You don't understand, she shouted, voice cracking. You don't get the pressure, the threats, the deals you have to make just to keep the system running. Denzel leaned in, eyes locked. Then maybe the system isn't worth saving. The crowd erupted. Gasps, shouts, even cheers collided in a wall of noise that swallowed the room. Producers waved frantically off camera, trying to cut to commercial, but the control room froze. This was too real to interrupt. Karoline's hands trembled, knuckles white. You want chaos, Denzel? You want anarchy? He shook his head, voice now a low rumble. I want honesty. Chaos already lives here, it's just been wearing a suit and a smile. That line hit like thunder. The audience rose to their feet, half in awe, half in disbelief. Denzel wasn't performing, he was indicting. Every camera angle, every flicker of light, every second of silence turned into cinematic gravity. Karoline's expression shifted, the fury faded, replaced by something far more dangerous, realization. She whispered, almost to herself, they'll destroy me for this. And Denzel, eyes heavy but unwavering, replied softly, maybe. But at least they'll know why. The lights dimmed, the music swelled, and somewhere in the distance, a producer whispered the words that would define the night. Keep it rolling. America needs to see this. The lights dimmed, but the tension didn't. The debate had ended minutes ago, yet no one in the studio moved. The audience sat frozen, still processing what they had just witnessed. It wasn't entertainment anymore, it was a collision of truth and power that left the air heavy with silence. Karoline stood by her podium, staring at the floor. The weight of the moment pressed down on her like a physical force. Her public image, the calm, confident communicator, was gone. What remained was raw, human, and frightened. Her fingers trembled as she reached for a glass of water, the ice clinking against the glass louder than any sound in the room. Denzel stayed seated, his posture steady, eyes distant. He wasn't triumphant. He wasn't smiling. He knew this kind of moment didn't end with applause. It rippled outward, into headlines, hashtags, and households across America. One of the producers approached cautiously, whispering, "We're off air." But Denzel didn't look away from Karoline. "No," he said quietly. "We're never really off air anymore." Karoline finally met his eyes, and in that second, the fiery arrogance she'd carried throughout the debate melted into something else: confusion, even guilt. "You made me look like the enemy," she murmured. "You did that yourself," he replied softly. "I just held up the mirror." The crew shifted uncomfortably. No one dared speak. The red light on the main camera was off, but the small recording light on a handheld phone was still glowing. A quiet truth lingered: this conversation wasn't over. It never would be. Outside the studio, social media had already exploded. Clips of Denzel's corruption wrapped in patriotism line flooded every platform. The internet split in two: some hailed him a hero, others called him a manipulator. But everyone agreed on one thing: they had never seen anything like it. Meanwhile, Karoline stood in the corner, scrolling through the early reactions. Every notification buzzed like a bullet. Her staff texted frantic PR strategies, but she ignored them. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about damage control. She was thinking about truth, the one she had spent her career spinning. As she turned back to Denzel, she asked quietly, "Do you ever regret saying too much?" He gave her a faint smile. "Only when people stop listening." The silence that followed was the kind that could start a movement. By the next morning, America was burning, not in flames, but in arguments. Every screen, every feed, every phone glowed with one name: Denzel. The clip from the debate had shattered records overnight. News anchors couldn't look away, analysts couldn't explain it. One network called it a moment of moral clarity. Another labeled it Hollywood's latest attack on conservatism. The internet didn't wait for context. Hashtags roared through social media like wildfire: hashtag Denzel unmasked power, hashtag truth versus spin, hashtag Karoline meltdown. Everyone had an opinion, and no one could stay silent. In the middle of this digital storm, Denzel sat alone in his dressing room. The mirror in front of him reflected exhaustion, the kind that comes after you've said something the world wasn't ready to hear. His phone buzzed non-stop. Friends, strangers, journalists, all demanding a follow-up statement. He didn't answer. He just stared at the reflection, then muttered, "They'll twist it before breakfast." Across the city, Karoline Leavitt faced her own reckoning. The campaign office was chaos, staffers barking orders, strategists scrambling for spin. "We can frame this," one advisor insisted. "Say it was media bias, emotional manipulation." But Karoline wasn't listening. She watched Denzel's calm defiance on loop, and for the first time, she didn't see arrogance. She saw conviction. Something she had long since traded for approval. Meanwhile, talk shows dissected every frame of their exchange. Commentators compared it to Frost/Nixon, others called it the moment the political mask fell. Memes flooded timelines, but under the noise, something real was stirring: a national conversation about accountability, truth, and who really spoke for the people. By evening, the president himself was asked about the debate during a press conference. He hesitated, then said, "If Americans are arguing about truth, that's progress. Maybe uncomfortable, but necessary." The comment ignited another wave of headlines. In living rooms across the country, families who never discussed politics were suddenly watching clips together. College students debated it in dorms, truck drivers listened on radio talk shows, and somewhere, a high school student replayed Denzel's line, "Chaos already lives here, it's just been wearing a suit and a smile," and decided he wanted to study journalism. Denzel's words had become more than dialogue. They had become a mirror America couldn't look away from. And while pundits screamed and networks spun, somewhere deep inside the noise, one truth pulsed quietly beneath it all. The revolution doesn't always start with a protest. Sometimes, it starts with a sentence. By day 3, the media frenzy had mutated into something darker. Headlines screamed in all caps. Talk show hosts called Denzel a hero in 1 hour and a hypocrite the next. Conspiracy channels dissected his pauses, his tone, even the way he looked at Karoline. The truth, it seemed, had become just another battlefield. Denzel avoided the cameras. He stayed in a small, quiet house near Malibu, blinds drawn, phone silenced. But silence didn't mean peace. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the moment Karoline's voice cracked on live TV, not out of weakness, but realization. That look haunted him. Maybe I pushed too far, he thought, then immediately shook his head. Or maybe no one's ever pushed far enough. Meanwhile, in D.C., Karoline faced a storm of her own. Her campaign donors demanded explanations. Her communications team begged for a televised apology. But she refused to play along. You can't PR your way out of truth, she snapped, startling her aides. It wasn't defiance, it was awakening. That night, she went on air again, unannounced. No makeup team, no teleprompter, just a single camera. America, she said softly, I spent years telling you what to think. But now, I think it's time I listened. It was raw, unpolished, and real. And it broke the internet. Within minutes, the clip trended above every topic, including Denzel himself. In his quiet living room, Denzel saw it too. The screen glowed in the dark, reflecting across his tired face. For the first time in days, he smiled. Finally, he murmured. Someone else said it. The next morning, headlines shifted, from rage to reflection. Leavitt's confession shakes political foundations. Pundits who had mocked her began to stumble over their words. Denzel received messages from unexpected voices, journalists, teachers, even a few politicians, thanking him for forcing the issue. But fame has a price. Protesters gathered outside his home, accusing him of stirring division. Studio contracts were quietly paused. Offers vanished overnight. Hollywood didn't like unpredictability, and Denzel had become its most unpredictable man. Still, he didn't waver. In a rare interview, when asked if he regretted confronting Karoline, his answer was calm, steady, and unforgettable. If telling the truth ruins me, then maybe I wasn't worth keeping. That line hit harder than the debate itself. It spread across timelines, campaign ads, even graffiti walls in downtown LA. Truth had become viral, and the man who sparked it was now both celebrated and condemned. But as Denzel watched the sunrise through the blinds, he realized something. For the first time in years, the noise meant something. The country was arguing, not about celebrity gossip, but about honesty. And that, he thought, was worth any cost. The studio lights burned brighter than ever, but this time, the air wasn't electric with hostility, it was heavy with truth. Denzel stood across from Karoline once more, their first face-to-face since the viral confrontation that split the nation. Cameras rolled, but no one spoke. The silence said more than any scripted opening could. The moderator finally broke it. Tonight, we're not here to argue, we're here to understand. It was the kind of line networks loved, but the audience knew something real might happen. Karoline took a deep breath. Gone was the polished strategist, this was a woman stripped of pretense. I spent years believing control was power, she began, her voice steady but low. But control without truth is just fear. Denzel didn't interrupt. He just nodded, slow, deliberate. And fear, he said, is what they sell us every night. Fear of each other, fear of change, fear of seeing what's real. The tension eased, replaced by something raw and human. For the first time, two people on opposite sides of America's divide weren't trying to win, they were trying to listen. Karoline leaned forward. You were right about one thing, she said. We've all been spinning stories. Even me. Especially me. But you made me stop. Denzel's eyes softened. No, he replied. The truth made you stop. I just reminded you what it sounds like. The audience was silent. No clapping, no gasps, just a collective stillness. Even the cameraman forgot to breathe. Then Denzel turned to the camera, looking directly into millions of homes. "America," he said, his voice firm but almost weary, "we've all been actors in someone else's script. Maybe it's time we start writing our own." It was the kind of sentence that didn't need volume, it carried its own gravity. Karoline nodded, eyes glistening. "Then let's make sure the next act isn't about division," she said. "Let it be about accountability." The feed cut to black. No outro music. No flashy graphics. Just silence, the kind that follows a collective awakening. By morning, the clip had shattered every viewing record in streaming history. Not because of drama, but because for once, America had witnessed something real, two voices stripped of ego, standing in the wreckage of lies, daring to rebuild trust. And as the world argued, analyzed, and reacted, one phrase lingered on every screen, printed bold beneath Denzel's final words. "The truth isn't trending. It's returning."